I was ruthlessly used, forced to pay for someone else's greed. But what I did in return shocked everyone. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Lila Parker, and I had just turned 25 when I got my degree in business administration. Throughout my college years, I'd been fortunate enough to live in my grandmother's old apartment. Well, technically my father's now, since he inherited it after she passed away 3 years ago. I only had to cover the utility bills, which I managed by working part-time at Sakura, and Chinese restaurant, just 2 blocks away. It wasn't always easy juggling work and studies. There were plenty of nights when I'd come home exhausted, feet aching from waiting tables, only to face hours of studying for exams or writing papers. But I made it work because that's what responsible adults do. The graduation dinner at my parents' house seemed perfect at first. Mom had outdone herself with the cooking, as usual. My younger sister Hannah, 18 at the time, kept making jokes about how she'd miss having me help her with her homework. A handful of relatives came too, Aunt Beth and Uncle Paul, my cousins Chris and Laura, and my grandmother from my mom's side. They were all congratulating me and sharing stories about their own college days. But after the relatives left, everything changed. Mom cleared her throat in that way she always did before saying something uncomfortable, and my stomach instantly knotted up. I'd known that sound since childhood. It never meant anything good. Lila, honey, she started, her voice unusually formal. Now that you've graduated, we need to discuss the apartment situation. I remember setting down my coffee cup slowly, trying to keep my hand steady. The ceramic made a soft clink against the saucer that seemed unusually loud in the suddenly quiet room. What about it? Well, if you want to continue living there, you'll need to start paying rent. The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. On my graduation day, of all days, Dad sat there silently, suddenly very interested in his coffee cup, while Hannah pretended to be absorbed in her phone, though I could see her watching the scene unfold from the corner of her eye. I see, I managed to say, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass. Mom went on to explain the terms in her matter-of-fact way. The rent would be below market rate. A family discount, she called it, with a tight smile, but still substantial. I did some quick mental math. I'd need a full-time job, and fast. The part-time wages from Sakura wouldn't cover this. I understand, I said finally, because what else could I say? They were right in a way. I wasn't a student anymore. I was an adult, and adults paid their way in life. Still, the timing felt cruel, like they couldn't even let me enjoy one day of celebration before bringing me back to reality. That night, lying in my bed at the apartment, I started searching for job openings nearby. The restaurant where I worked part-time couldn't offer me full-time hours, so I knew I needed something new, something more stable. As I scrolled through listings on my phone, I tried to focus on the practical aspects rather than the hurt feelings bubbling beneath the surface. The next year flew by in a blur of work, rent payments, and adjusting to post-college life. I landed a decent job at a marketing firm near the apartment. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and then some. I was hired as a junior account coordinator, and while the starting salary wasn't huge, it was enough to cover the rent my parents were charging plus utilities with a little left over for savings. Every month, I dutifully transferred the rent money to Mom's account, usually adding a little extra for utilities even though she never asked for it. I wanted to prove that I could handle adult responsibilities, that I was responsible and reliable. Maybe part of me was still trying to earn their approval, though I wouldn't admit that to myself at the time. Hannah would stop by occasionally, usually when she needed help with college applications or wanted to raid my closet. She was in her senior year of high school, and I could see her changing, becoming more distant and secretive. Her visits became less about spending time with me and more about what she could get from me: homework help, clothes, advice about boys. Hannah had always been the baby of the family, used to getting her way. Mom and Dad spoiled her rotten, though I tried not to be bitter about it. They'd never made her get a part-time job like I had, never pushed her to be independent. She started dating Ethan around this time. He was a year older than her, working part-time at the mall's game store. The first time she brought him to my apartment, I wasn't particularly impressed. He seemed nice enough, but there was something about him that set off warning bells. Maybe it was the way he talked about getting rich quick, or how he seemed to expect everyone to take care of him. Then came the phone call that would change everything. "Tomorrow, you need to come over right away." Mom's voice was tight with tension. "It's important." I assumed it would be about Hannah's college plans. She'd been waffling between several schools, and I figured Mom wanted my input. Maybe they needed help with financial planning or wanted to discuss scholarship options. Hannah had decent grades, not spectacular like mine had been, but good enough to get into a state school. How wrong I was. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the atmosphere was strange. Mom and Dad sat rigidly on their usual spots on the couch, while Hannah perched on the armchair, looking smug. That was the only word for it. "Sit down, Lila," Dad said, his voice gravelly. He looked older somehow, tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. I sat on the edge of the ottoman, my heart pounding. Whatever this was, it wasn't about college applications. "Hannah is pregnant," Mom announced without preamble. I sat there stunned, trying to process what I'd just heard. My 18-year-old sister was pregnant by her part-time mall employee boyfriend. I noticed Mom's hands twisting in her lap, a nervous habit she'd had since I was little. "There's something else we need to discuss," Mom said, straightening her back and smoothing her skirt. "Hannah and Ethan will need a place to live. They'll be moving into the apartment." I felt like I'd been slapped. The room started spinning slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the ottoman to steady myself. "Excuse me?" "You'll need to move out," Mom stated matter-of-factly, as if she were telling me about the weather. "Hannah and Ethan need somewhere to start their family. It's the perfect solution, really. The apartment is already furnished, it's in a good neighborhood, and it's close to Catherine's parents." I looked at Hannah, who was examining her freshly painted nails with a satisfied smirk. She didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable about kicking her own sister out of her home. She was wearing my old sweater again, I noticed absently, the one she'd borrowed last month and never returned. "I'll need time to find a new place," I managed to say, my head spinning. The thought of apartment hunting while working full-time made my stomach churn. A week should be enough. "Oh, and Lila," Mom added, as if she'd almost forgotten something trivial, like asking me to pick up milk on my way home. "You'll still need to continue paying the rent." I actually laughed out loud, thinking it was a joke. The sound was harsh and unwelcome in the tense room, but when I saw their serious faces, my laugh died in my throat. "You can't be serious. Your sister and Ethan are young," Mom explained patiently, as if talking to a child. "They don't have jobs yet. And with the baby coming." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at Hannah's still flat stomach. "So let me get this straight," I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You want me to move out and continue paying rent for an apartment I won't be living in? For them? They need our help, Lila," Dad said sternly, finally meeting my eyes. "It's your responsibility, as the older sister. Family helps family." "My responsibility." I stood up, my hands shaking with anger now. If they're mature enough to have a baby, they're mature enough to get jobs and support themselves. Has either of them even looked for full-time work? "How can you be so selfish?" Hannah suddenly piped up, her eyes filling with dramatic tears. I'd seen those same tears when she was 12 and wanted a new phone, or 14 and wasn't allowed to go to a party. I'm going to be a mother. Don't you care about your niece or nephew? You're being very ungrateful, Mom said coldly, after everything we've done for you. Ungrateful? I've been paying rent for the past year. I've been working since college, and now you want me to support two perfectly capable adults who got themselves into this situation? I'm not paying a single cent for them. If you want to enable this, that's your choice, but count me out. I walked out of that house with their shouts of ungrateful and selfish following me to my car. The front door slammed behind me with a finality that felt like the end of something fundamental. I didn't wait a week. That very night, I started packing my things, tears streaming down my face as I sorted through 4 years of memories. Fortunately, I had some savings. All those extra hours at work were finally going to pay off. I'd been putting aside money for a rainy day, and apparently, the storm had arrived. I found a small studio apartment across town and signed the lease the next day. It's such an important job, you know? Then came the kicker. Actually, we're thinking of having more kids soon. Mom and Dad are such suckers. I mean, they're so supportive. They'll have to keep helping us if we have more babies. And we want a big wedding, too. Nothing cheap. Those old fools will pay for everything. I read Hannah's email 3 times, each time feeling more disgusted than the last. My little sister had turned into someone I didn't recognize, someone who called our parents old fools while happily taking their money, someone who was planning to have more children just to keep the gravy train running. I didn't reply. What could I say? Congratulations on being a manipulative mooch? How's the professional gold digging working out for you? Instead, I closed my laptop and tried to forget about it, but the words kept echoing in my head. Those old fools will pay for everything. But fate had other plans. A few months later, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in over a year, Mom's. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Lila, she said, her voice different somehow, tired, defeated. We need to talk. Can you come over? Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some part of me still hoped for reconciliation. Whatever the reason, I found myself driving to my parents' house that evening. This terror from my family had to end, but what happened next was a complete nightmare. The familiar streets felt strange now, like visiting a place you've only seen in dreams. They looked older than I remembered. Dad's hair had more gray, and Mom's face showed new wrinkles. Dark circles under their eyes spoke of long hours and sleepless nights. They sat on their familiar couch, but something about their posture spoke of defeat. We've been taking extra shifts, Dad said without preamble, his voice rough with exhaustion, working overtime to help your sister and Ethan. I waited, saying nothing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. We know you're doing well at your job, Mom continued, and I felt my heart sink. This wasn't going to be an apology. This was going to be another demand. We think it's time you help support your sister, too. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh of pure disbelief. The sound bounced off the walls of the too-quiet house. You want me to what? Your sister can't work right now, Mom insisted, leaning forward. She has the baby to take care of. It's a full-time job. What about Ethan? He needs to help with the baby, too. I looked at them. These people who had raised me, who had taught me about responsibility and hard work, who had pushed me to get good grades and work part-time through college. Now they sat here, making excuses for two capable adults who refused to support themselves. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, carefully enunciating each word. You're working extra shifts to support my sister and her fiancé, who are both perfectly capable of working, but choose not to. And now you want me to help enable their laziness too? Dad's face turned red. You're being selfish and greedy. If you don't help support your sister, consider yourself disowned. You can't disown someone who's already gone, I said quietly, and walked out of their house for what I hoped would be the last time. The sound of the door closing behind me felt like the period at the end of a very long sentence. When I got home that night, my apartment felt like a sanctuary. I kicked off my shoes, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at my computer. My hands were steady as I opened my email and found Hannah's message from months ago, the one where she bragged about manipulating our parents, called them old fools, and outlined her plan to avoid work by having more children. I stared at it for a long moment, my cursor hovering over the forward button. Part of me felt like I was betraying a confidence, but then I remembered Hannah had betrayed our parents' trust long before this. Without adding any message or explanation, I forwarded the email to Mom. Sometimes the raw truth is more powerful than any commentary. Mom didn't respond, but a week later, my phone rang. It was Aunt Beth, Mom's sister, who had always been the family's unofficial news channel. "You won't believe what happened," she said, her voice thick with family gossip. I could picture her sitting in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, probably still in her nursing scrubs after her hospital shift. "Your parents kicked Hannah out of the apartment. I nearly dropped my coffee." "What?" "Apparently, there was a huge fight. Your mom found out Hannah's been mocking them behind their backs, planning to take advantage of them. They told her and Ethan to get out, and that they weren't giving them any more money." I listened as Aunt Beth detailed the explosive confrontation, how Hannah had screamed and cried, pulling out all her usual dramatic tactics, how Mom had stood there uselessly, looking like a deer in headlights, how Dad had finally put his foot down and told them they had 3 days to leave. According to Aunt Beth, Mom had been eerily calm, simply saying, "We'd been played for fools long enough." After I hung up, I wasn't surprised when my phone lit up with Hannah's number. I could predict the conversation before it even started. "Lila," her voice was thick with tears, the same fake crying she'd used since we were kids. "Can we stay with you? Just until we figure things out? Please, we have nowhere else to go." "No," I said firmly, surprised by how easy it was to say that single word. "You're just like Mom and Dad," she screamed. "You're all so selfish. We're family." "Family doesn't exploit family," I said quietly, and hung up before she could argue. Later, I heard through the family grapevine that Hannah, Ethan, and the baby had moved in with his parents. Apparently, his mother was a strict, no-nonsense woman who believed in tough love and responsibility, the kind of parent who didn't tolerate freeloading or manipulation. According to Aunt Beth, Hannah was miserable. Her mother-in-law made her follow a strict schedule, help with housework, and actually parent her child instead of passing him off to others. She had to do laundry, cook meals, and contribute to the household. Hannah spent her days crying about how unfair it all was, how nobody understood how hard her life was. Life has a way of coming full circle. A few weeks ago, on my birthday, I was celebrating with friends at my apartment. Not the tiny studio anymore, but a nice 2-bedroom place I'd bought with my savings and good credit. I'd invited a small group over for dinner and drinks. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company. The doorbell rang during dessert, and a courier handed me a package. The return address made my heart skip a beat. It was from my parents. Inside was a silver photo frame, elegant but not flashy. I recognized it immediately. It was the kind of thing I'd admired once in passing during a shopping trip with Mom years ago. I'd been looking for something to display my college diploma and had commented on how beautiful it was, but the price had been way out of my budget at the time. With it was a card. "We're sorry. We miss you. When you're ready, we'd like to talk." The handwriting was Mom's, but Dad had signed it too. No demands, no guilt trips, just 9 simple words. I set the frame on my coffee table and stared at it for a long time. My friends asked if I was okay, and I honestly didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that a silver frame could feel like both an olive branch and a weapon? That was 2 weeks ago. The frame is still on my coffee table, and the card is pinned to my refrigerator. I see them every day, reminders of what I've lost and what might still be salvaged. I haven't called them yet. The hurt is still there, a dull ache that flares up when I think about everything that happened. I hear bits and pieces about Hannah from relatives. She's still living with Ethan's parents, still complaining about having to do chores and follow rules. Her mother-in-law makes her help with cooking and cleaning and insists that Ethan keep his full-time job at a local warehouse. They have to contribute to household expenses and save money if they ever want to move out on their own. Part of me hopes this experience will help Hannah grow up. Will teach her the values our parents failed to instill. Maybe someday she'll understand that love doesn't mean enabling bad behavior, and that being family doesn't mean being a doormat. Maybe she'll learn that respect has to be earned, not demanded, and that responsibility comes before privileges. As for me, I'm doing well. My career is thriving. I just got another promotion, and I'm managing my own team now. I have good friends who understand boundaries and respect independence. I'm learning to set healthy limits in all my relationships, personal and professional. Sometimes I miss the family I thought I had, but I'm starting to accept that it was never really what I imagined it to be. The silver frame sits on my coffee table, both a reminder of what I've lost and a possibility of what might be rebuilt someday when I'm ready, when the hurt has faded enough for forgiveness to take root. When I can look at my parents without seeing the people who chose to enable my sister's worst behavior over supporting my independence. But for now, I'm focusing on my own life, my own growth, my own journey. My apartment is slowly becoming a home, filled with things I've chosen and earned. I'm planning a vacation for next month, my first real one since college. I'm thinking about getting a dog. Small steps toward building the life I want, not the one others tried to force me into.